So recently I went back to Japan for the second time this year. And so for the second time in 2 months, I had two 12-hour flights to and from Japan. And while with the first time I went to Japan, I dedicated myself to reading One Punch Man, I've already caught up with One Punch Man, so I figured might as well catch up with another manga. So I decided to read the entirety of JJK. And wow, is it complicated. It was like rereading Hunter x Hunter for the first time. The powers are so complicated. There's barriers. Certain powers play into other powers. If you take a risk, the powers get stronger. Domain expansion to domain expansion battles, simple domains. I found myself having to reread chapters 2 to 3 times just to figure out what was going on, which is good for me, because now I understand everything. But if I found it complicated, and it is quite literally my job to decipher anime for everybody on the internet, there's probably a couple people out there who could use a little lesson. So today, we're gonna start with something relatively simple. We're gonna dip our toe into the JJK world and see if this here page wants me to talk about it more. Today, we're gonna talk about arguably the best boy in all of JJK, Gojo Satoru, and more specifically, both how his abilities work and how strong those abilities make him. Because if we're being entirely real, nobody's a better representation of how complicated powers can be in the JJK universe than Gojo. But Gojo is also the perfect example of how certain powers can stack on top of each other in the JJK universe to make an incredibly strong fighter. So he serves as the perfect way for us to begin chipping away at the very large iceberg that is JJK. But before we get to chipping at anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you feel like chipping away at any self-doubt I have, go ahead and follow my brand new podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. Before we get into all that, guys, today I want to talk about our favorite reoccurring sponsor to the page, Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co. Tokyo Treat and Sakura Co. are monthly subscription boxes that send you Japanese snacks. Up first, let's talk about Tokyo Treat. Every single month has a theme, and this month's theme is Japan's best bites. But outside of that theme, Tokyo Treat focuses on how a modern Japanese household would snack, sending you a myriad of Japanese exclusive flavors like melon Kit Kats. But this might look intimidating to you because you don't read or speak Japanese. So if you want to eat something like this, you may not know if you'll like it or if you'll be allergic to it, which is where our 24-page pamphlet comes in that tells us all about every single item in this box. Everything from common allergens to when and where these snacks are eaten. And from that, we can learn that these are curry kame-san senbai. So let's give them a try. Immediately on the nose, smells exactly like curry, but let's try them. Tastes like curry too. The flavor profile is incredible. But enough about Tokyo Treat. Let's talk about Sakura Co. Sakura Co. also has a theme every month, and this month's theme is a taste of Japan. But while Tokyo Treat focuses on how a modern Japanese household snacks, Sakura Co. focus on how Japan has snacked for hundreds of years, supplying you with artisanal and handmade snacks from all over Japan. So while you won't see things you're familiar with, like Kit Kats, you'll see more things like this, which may seem intimidating, but once again, we have our pamphlet. And from that, we can learn that these are actually mayonnaise arare. Sounds interesting. Let's give them a try. Down the hatch. If the last chip nailed the curry flavor, this more than nailed the mayonnaise flavor. I gotta go in for another one. It's like every different chip is a different kind of mayonnaise. On top of snacks, Sakura Co. also sends you one piece of tableware a month, and this month's was a little box that you can use for pickled ginger or wasabi. So what are you guys waiting for? Use code TWC at checkout for $5 off your first order from Sakura Co. or Tokyo Treat. Just navigate to either of their websites through the links in my description, and you'll be snacking like a pro in no time. No one can nail a flavor like the Japanese. So Gojo, the current head of the Gojo family, regarded as the strongest jujutsu sorcerer in the universe. From the second that Gojo was born, bounties were placed on his head, as he was the first person to inherit both Limitless and the Six Eyes in 400 years. His very birth, his very being shifted the power balance from cursed spirits to jujutsu sorcerers. And more than that, rose the notoriety of the Gojo family to as high as it possibly could be. But where does Gojo's strength come from? What is the Limitless? What is the Six Eyes? And how do they both work? Well, in order to break all that down, we're gonna have to start where we usually start these videos, at the beginning. See, Gojo wasn't always the strongest jujutsu sorcerer on Earth. He had to work his way there. He was obviously born with an incredible amount of promise, having both the Six Eyes and the Limitless. But when Gojo himself was in JJK High, both him and Geto were referred to as the strongest, being revered as equally strong sorcerers capable of wiping any problem they come across off the map. It genuinely wasn't until Geto and Gojo needed to acquire a star plasma vessel for Master Tengen, who is the genderless entity that lives under JJK High and maintains the barrier around JJK High, that Gojo began to evolve into the strongest being in the universe. By the way, I feel as though I shouldn't blast past that whole star plasma vessel thing. Master Tengen is kind of like a thumb looking dude from Spy Kids, and every 500 years, Master Tengen needs to switch vessels. The vessels that he switches into are referred to as star plasma vessels. This is because Master Tengen as an entity is technically immortal, however, he still ages. So his vessels can only age for 500 years. And unfortunately for Geto and Gojo, those 500 years ended while they were in JJK High. So Gojo and Geto needed to acquire the next star plasma vessel. And that star plasma vessel is Rico Amani. However, there's people that don't want Master Tengen to take a new star plasma vessel for. So these people hire a man by the name of Toji Fushiguro. Now Toji is incredibly strong, but not strong because he's a strong jujutsu sorcerer. Toji is incredibly strong because he doesn't have cursed energy, which is something that is exceedingly rare in the JJK universe. It makes him all but impossible to track or follow by jujutsu sorcerers, as jujutsu sorcerers usually fight based off reading their opponent's cursed energy. And it's Toji's idea to basically drag Rico Amani all across Japan in order to wear down Geto and Gojo. Because at this point, Gojo hasn't perfected his Six Eyes or his Limitless. And while Gojo does have an insane amount of cursed energy, probably the second or third most in the entirety of the JJK universe, during these couple of days, he's forced to keep his Six Eyes and his Limitless activated the entire time. And for those of you really paying attention to the anime or the manga, you'll say,
well, that's not an issue for Gojo. He literally always has them activated.
However, in his early high school days, that was a problem, because at this current time point, Gojo had not yet perfected the Six Eyes. And thus, when he came into combat against Toji a couple of days into protecting and escorting Rico, Gojo was significantly weakened in that he didn't have access to the entirety of his cursed energy. Gojo in this battle against Toji, who has no cursed energy, and therefore Gojo isn't able to track his movements, decides that if he can't track the movements of Toji, who is incredibly fast and strong, that he'll simply blast away everything around him. That way Toji won't be able to sneak up on him. However, after doing that, Toji absolutely sneaks up on him and stabs him through the neck, which you're saying should be impossible because of Gojo's Limitless. However, Toji has a cursed weapon known as the Inverted Spear of Heaven, and this Inverted Spear of Heaven disrupts cursed techniques, and therefore it was able to scramble Gojo's Limitless and pierce through his neck. However, this isn't Gojo's end, obviously, and even though Toji believes Gojo is dead, Gojo in this moment has his awakening. See, the reason that we're talking about this is for this one specific moment, because it was this battle against Toji that awoken Gojo to his true potential. See, Gojo, the minute he was stabbed through the neck, converted all of his cursed energy into positive energy, because you need positive energy to pull off reversed curse technique, also known as healing techniques. See, Gojo up to this moment had not been good at reverse curse technique. However, the catalyst of being stabbed through the neck instantly taught him, but this breakthrough applies to just more than reverse curse technique. It also applies to his Limitless, as his breakthrough in finding out how to convert his curse energy into positive energy has taught Gojo how to combine his red and blue to create purple, giving him the strongest weapon in his arsenal, purple. We then check back in with Gojo a year later, when Geto and Shoko are helping him with his techniques. It's at this point that it's revealed to us that Gojo has mastered his Six Eyes, so that he can use his Six Eyes and his Limitless endlessly. A technique he mastered so he would never be put in a situation like he was put in against Toji. So now that the stage is set for how Gojo got as strong as he is, let's talk about these abilities that he mastered. Let's start with the Six Eyes because they're what we know less about, but they're also somehow easier to explain. Gojo's Six Eyes is what he worked on the year after his battle against Toji. Much like the Limitless, this is a technique specific to members of the Gojo family. However, as far as we know, the Six Eyes are only used to boost the power of Limitless, meaning that if hypothetically you were to inherit just the Six Eyes, they would be kind of useless. See, we learned from Yuta and kind of Gojo that the Six Eyes allow Gojo to use his techniques limitlessly. See, all we really hear from Gojo when he's practicing his techniques with Geto and Shoko a year after Toji's fight is that he can now use Limitless in the Six Eyes forever. But we're never really given a reason for that until Yuta explains what the Six Eyes are. So Yuta explains to us that the Six Eyes increase the efficiency of Gojo's curse techniques to such a degree that they basically cost him no cursed energy. The exact words that Yuta uses is that Gojo's cursed techniques use an infinitesimally close to zero amount of cursed energy, meaning that hypothetically Gojo could run out of cursed energy if he were to battle for a millennium, but that would never be the case. Because not only does Gojo have a top 3 amount of cursed energy in the entire JJK verse, but all of his techniques take a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that cursed energy to use. Meaning for all intents and purposes, Gojo could fight at his highest potential forever. On top of that, the Six Eyes give the user an insane amount of perception, as the Six Eyes give the user the ability to turn one moment into a minute in their brain. That is to say that in a blink of an eye, a Six Eyes user can see not only kilometers, but also deduce everything that's happening in those kilometers that they can see, giving them the ability to analyze and calculate exactly what they need to do significantly faster than anybody else. On top of that, Six Eyes allow the user to see cursed energy with incredible preciseness, being able to read and predict what cursed energy is going to do significantly better than anybody else. More than anything, the Six Eyes allow the user to deduce the mass, speed, and shape of every single thing they see, which is why the Six Eyes are said to maximize the potential of Limitless. Because while the user of Limitless can control Limitless, meaning they're taking an active role in making sure nothing ever touches them, Six Eyes can also be set to run Limitless on autopilot. That is to say that the Six Eyes will deduce any projectile coming towards the user of Limitless, check its speed, shape, and size, and then calculate the reverse cursed energy needed to make sure that that object doesn't hit the user of Limitless. Meaning, much like Gaara's perfect sand defense, Gojo, if he's using the Six Eyes to run his Limitless, doesn't have to put any input into his Limitless to stop everybody from hitting him. Meaning Gojo can focus on other things like hand-to-hand combat, or red, or blue, or purple. But the Six Eyes are even more incredible than that, because the Six Eyes are like the highest def camera you could imagine. Even when covered. You see, Gojo can still see when his eyes are covered, better than you or I can see. And users of the Six Eyes need to cover their eyes, because if they don't have their eyes covered, they pull in so much information with their Six Eyes constantly that it tires their eyes out. The only time Gojo really needs his eyes uncovered if he wants to use things like Limitless Void or Hollow Purple, because these are advanced applications of the Six Eyes in Limitless. Everything else Gojo can have his eyes covered for, and that's basically everything you need to know about the Six Eyes. So let's get into Gojo's other significantly more confusing but much better understood ability, Limitless. Limitless at its base isn't that confusing. It's an ability specific to the Gojo family, just like with the Six Eyes. And in essence, it gives the user of Limitless almost complete control over space at an atomic level using cursed energy. So that's pretty simple, the ability to manipulate space using cursed energy down to an atomic level. I mean, broken, but simple. Limitless has 3 standard and 1 non-standard form. The first of the standard forms is Infinity. Now, this is the most known of Gojo's abilities. Infinity is the neutral form of Limitless. This is Gojo's absolute defense ability. His ability to stop anything that approaches him. The reason that I put stop in quotation marks is because Gojo doesn't actually stop anything that comes towards him, much in the same way as nothing actually ever really stops. See, Gojo, instead of stopping something, slows it down, but slows it down to a point that is infinitesimally close to 0, meaning that as you get closer to Gojo, your speed is continually halved. And while a number that is halved can never become 0, because if you were to times 1 by 0.5, you would get 0.5, times it again, you get 0.25, so on and so forth, that number would infinitesimally approach 0, meaning that while it would never become 0, it would get as physically close to 0 as possible. Which means that if Gojo stood there and you tried to punch him for an eternity, you would eventually get very, very close to his face, but you would never actually touch him, because Gojo in this circumstance is 0. And this is why it's called Infinity, because there is an infinite amount of space between you and Gojo. But this doesn't mean that nothing can touch Gojo. Gojo can decide what does and doesn't touch him. And he does this using the power of his Six Eyes that allows him to read the speed, mass, and danger rating of anything approaching him. Relatively simple, we get it. The second standard form of Limitless is Blue, specifically Curse Technique Lapse Blue. Now this is unfortunately where we start to get a little bit more complicated. See, Blue is a reinforced form of neutral Limitless, also known as Infinity. In order to talk about this, we're gonna have to harken back to the idea that Gojo is 0. Anything that tries to approach Gojo will never reach 0. However, when Gojo pours more cursed energy into his neutral Limitless, he introduces negative numbers. That is to say that Gojo goes from 0 to a negative number. Now, physically, this is an impossibility. By Gojo becoming a negative number, he's creating negative distance. And negative distance can't exist. You can't be -1 centimeters from something. No matter in what direction you are from something, you are 1 centimeter from it. So the universe doesn't like the impossibility of this negative number or this negative distance existing, because physically it shouldn't happen. And thus the universe tries to rebalance the equilibrium. And thus the universe tries to stuff all of the matter around this negative distance into the negative distance space, which creates a strong magnetic force, kind of like a black hole. Well, it can be like a black hole. It can also be like a strong magnet. The attractive force of the blue is decided by how much cursed energy is put into the blue. And we've seen the blue at a point of strength where it crumbles all of the buildings around it in a second. Any human body hit with this technique implodes immediately as every single atom in your body is pulled towards that negative space. However, since this technique is controlled by the Six Eyes and therefore can be manipulated incredibly precisely, Gojo is also able to use this technique to pull two blues towards each other at insanely fast speeds. And therefore he can use the attractive forces of these essentially black holes to teleport himself instantaneously. All you need to do is create a negative space where he is and somewhere else, and he essentially makes a warp hole to another place. Meaning Gojo, with the use of blue, effectively can teleport. Gojo's third and final standard form of Limitless is red, also known as Curse Technique Reversal Red. Now Gojo didn't figure out how to use this technique until after his battle against Toji, because this technique requires Gojo to reverse his cursed energy into positive energy. Now this technique is a bit less complicated, because instead of creating an attracting force, red creates a repelling force. And this doesn't require you making a negative distance or negative numbers, because once again, if we think of Gojo as 0, in order to repel things away from him, he would have to use positive numbers, like 1, 2, or 3, because everything outwards from Gojo is a positive number from 0. However, even though this technique sounds easier to use, it's actually significantly harder to use amongst users of Limitless, because it requires mastery over reverse curse technique, and turning the negative cursed energy into positive cursed energy is a very difficult task, especially when doing it at such a high level as red. Fortunately, Gojo, after figuring out reverse curse technique in order to save his life after being stabbed through the throat, was able to find out how to create positive cursed energy. And now he has complete and total control over red. He also has complete control over is the only non-standard form of Limitless, purple. Now, Hollow Technique Purple is a combination of both blue and red, also known as a combination of attractive and repulsive forces, meaning essentially it's a black hole that Gojo can shoot. By creating an attractive force with blue and propelling it with red, purple is created. Now, this attack is Gojo's most devastating, because it gives him the destructive force of blue with the range of red. And since Gojo can control space to an atomic level, anything caught in purple is erased molecularly. Gojo, with the application to purple, is able to erase anything in his path on an atomic level. But even purple isn't Gojo's strongest ability, because Gojo's domain expansion is probably the strongest domain expansion in the entire show. There's domain expansions like Hikari's that put him in a pachinko game that makes him unkillable for 4 minutes, or domain expansions like Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine that allows him to destroy anything within 200 meters of him. But both of those tremor at the idea of Gojo's domain expansion, Unlimited Void. The Unlimited Void domain expansion brings Gojo and whoever he's cast into his domain expansion into the Limitless, an extra-dimensional space where everything that has ever existed or will exist or has existed is currently existing. Basically brings Gojo and who's ever in his domain into an infinite well of information. And as all of the information of the universe floods into his opponent's head, they are understandably too stunned to move, as all of the actions a person has or will take in their life are flooded back into their heads, and all they're allowed to do is stand there until they die. But if that sounds scary, wait, it gets worse. Gojo also has such precise control over this domain expansion that he's able to open it for 0.2 seconds. See, Gojo, during the Shibuya incident, which I'm not gonna get into right now because spoilers, was able to open his domain expansion for 0.2 seconds. He opened his domain expansion for 0.2 seconds because he was surrounded by innocent people. And he figured that by opening his domain expansion for 0.2 seconds, that the humans around him wouldn't have permanent after effects after being put into into the limitless void. As in 0.2 seconds, the amount of information that they were given was only a half a year's worth, which tells us that every second in the limitless void exposes you to 2.5 years of knowledge. And in these 0.2 seconds of unlimited void, Gojo killed 1,000 cursed spirits. Well, that's not entirely accurate. Gojo activated his domain expansion in 0.2 seconds to stun all of the cursed spirits around him. And then in the preceding 299 seconds that all of the cursed spirits around him were stunned, he killed 1,000 cursed spirits. Still very impressive. That is 3.3 cursed spirits a second. And it probably would have been substantially faster if Gojo wasn't weaving through a crowd of innocents. So now that we have all this information, how strong is Satoru Gojo? Well, obviously we know that he is the strongest sorcerer in the JJK universe. But that doesn't mean that Gojo doesn't have weaknesses. He absolutely does. Ironically, Gojo is at his weakest in the JJK universe. If you were to plop Gojo into any other universe, he would be unkillable. His ability to not be hit by anything and fight limitlessly basically makes him an invincible perpetual motion machine. The irony is, within the confines of the JJK universe, there are things that can kill Gojo, like the inverted Spear of Heaven, cursed objects that can mess with his cursed techniques, blades that can penetrate through the limitless, objects like the prison realm, which I'm not going to talk about right now because, once again, spoilers. So ironically, even though Gojo is absolutely the strongest sorcerer and probably the strongest being in the JJK universe, there are ways to take him down. Ironically, Maki, as she currently stands with the inverted Spear of Heaven, would probably be Gojo's best battle in the JJK universe currently. But if we're ignoring things like cursed objects and cursed tools, scaling Gojo is a bit easy. The easiest things to talk about when scaling Gojo are his stamina and his durability, because both are basically irrelevant. It's been stated that Gojo's cursed techniques use an infinitesimally close to zero amount of his cursed energy, which is already almost at the level of Yuta, as Yuta is the only person in the JJK universe who's been stated to have more cursed energy than Gojo. However, since Yuta doesn't have the ability to use infinitesimally close to zero amount of his cursed energy every time he uses a cursed technique, Gojo can fight substantially longer than Yuta, to an almost irrelevant degree. So in the same way that if Denji had a constant supply of blood, he would be a perpetual motion machine, Gojo, just by existing, is kind of a perpetual motion machine. And then obviously there's his durability. Durability doesn't really matter if you physically cannot be hit. It quite literally does not matter how big or how fast a certain object is that's approaching Gojo. Its speed will be halved perpetually as it tries to approach him. And considering the fact that his infinity is infinitely powered, unless you have a cursed object that can break through his infinity, like the inverted Spear of Heaven, you will never land a hit on him. So you could say the same thing about his defensive power. It doesn't matter the level of attack you launch at Gojo, it's not gonna hit him. Now, if he blew up the earth that Gojo was standing on, could he breathe in space? We don't really know. And the answer is probably. He could probably extend the infinity around him to give himself a pocket of air. Also taking into the fact that he has perfected reverse curse technique, meaning that even if you were to land a fatal blow on him, he could simply heal himself from it. And once again, with the power of the Six Eyes, he could heal himself perpetually, as even his reverse curse technique use an infinitesimally close to zero amount of his total energy. The only real place we see Gojo lacking is when it comes to attack power, as pretty much the biggest thing we've seen out of Gojo is his purple, which might be like mountain or island level, but at the same time, considering the purple is an extension of his blue, which creates an actual black hole and implodes human bodies, you could hypothetically scale purple all the way up to black hole level. It's just a matter of how much cursed energy Gojo puts into it. And once again, considering the fact that Gojo has almost limitless cursed energy, meaning that Gojo could pour hypothetically as much cursed energy as he wanted into a blue, he could probably make a full-on black hole. He just doesn't want to because it would destroy the earth. So the question still remains, how strong is Gojo? And the only real answer is as strong as he wants to be. I mean, we're not even considering his domain expansion, but there's a possibility that his domain expansion would only work against those with cursed energy, as we've seen people like Maki in domain expansions being treated like buildings because she doesn't have cursed energy. So we don't know if people without cursed energy within the confines of the unlimited void would be treated like buildings or would come under the effects of the unlimited void, because we've never seen anybody without cursed energy be affected by the unlimited void. So how strong is Gojo? Well, he's so strong that the mangaka quite literally had to write the Shibuya incident. So you tell me. And while you guys are telling me all about it, tell me in the comments if you think I missed anything. And while you're at it, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I genuinely love just getting deep into a confusing manga. This is how I stay relevant.